Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and I'm taking care of business. Joining me today is Father Cristino Bouvette, who is a Roman Catholic priest in the Calgary Diocese. Thanks, Father, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, humongous news today out of the Vatican in Rome. Pope Francis issued an apology to the Indigenous people of Canada for the abuses that took place in the residential school system. Father, first of all, your reaction to that statement and the apology given by the Pope today.
Well, I was watching it live. I've stayed here in Calgary throughout this week to be available for things such as this while the delegation is in Rome. And I have to say that I was not expecting a papal apology even before this happened. And I have had my own personal feelings towards that, whether it would or would not happen. But in hearing the Holy Father say those words today with the very clear sentiment that motivated them, I have to say I was deeply moved, actually beyond what I would have expected myself to have felt as I listened to that.
Well, and I looked up the statement on, on the Vatican website, and you read the whole statement, and it's quite powerful. It's the language he used. Did that strike you?
Yes, very much so. I heard him. I was hearing it in Italian, which I understand, but then the translation that was being provided, I thought was capturing only part of what it sounded like he was saying. I wanted to be able to just hear his voice because it was evident in how he was speaking and the very careful words he was using. There was a break in the translation at one point, and I heard him say "vergogna," this shame that he experiences now, having heard the personal testimonies of these Indigenous delegates who were there. I think aroused in him a sense of taking a personal toll on him as a Catholic and as a priest and bishop, and ultimately now responsible for the entire church.
Tell me what you think this will do and what the Pope did today in terms of moving forward in this whole issue that has kind of gripped our nation now for a couple of years. Well, it's gripped it for longer, much longer than that, obviously, because of the situation, but it's been really highlighted here in the last couple of years.
Well, one thing for sure is that although I won't question or pass judgment on those who have felt as though they should question the church's authenticity and sincerity in wanting to make good on our commitments to pursue reconciliation with Indigenous people. I understand what has motivated that skepticism, but I would hope that today, in hearing the words of the Holy Father, they would see that we mean this and that we are firmly committed to this, that the Pope himself would express and convey such sentiments must, I hope, serve as a gesture of good faith, that we remain firmly committed to continuing to walk this path of justice, truth, healing, and reconciliation.
Okay. And, we have you on here today, not simply because you're not just a priest, but you're also an Indigenous priest. So you have skin in the game, so to speak, right? And you're involved, and this is a personal issue that touched you over the years. How, as a priest with an Indigenous background, is it more powerful for you what you've heard today from the Pope?
Yes, nothing that I've gone through in particularly the last year, as all of this has truly, really boiled back up to the surface in a profound way. None of it has been without me thinking of my kokum, my Cree grandmother, and the impact that it would have had on her if she was still living through all this. She died in 2019. And she and I talked about this, even talked about a papal apology years ago after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report came out. I asked her point blank how she felt about that, and not to be afraid that I was a priest and she couldn't tell me how she actually felt. And she said that although she would receive it and accept it, she herself did not feel the need for it. And that started to shape part of how I also felt towards this. But now, hearing what happened today, I could only help but wonder, how would it have impacted her if she was still here with us and actually heard those sentiments conveyed in the context in which this happened? This was not a Zoom call, a 2-second apology delivered from some office in the Vatican. This was the culmination of this entire week's worth of the Holy Father receiving the testimonies of those who went to give witness to those who suffered in the past or who suffered themselves. And I think that shaped the sentiment with which he conveyed that apology. And I believe that it would have been as meaningful to my grandmother as it was for me to hear today as well.
So I'm curious, Father, like obviously, you know, what your grandmother's testimonies, so to speak, over the years, and you know, experiencing it, and yourself being you know, Indigenous as well. How did you reconcile that and what happened with the church and residential schools, and become a priest? I'm just curious of how that, you know, the workings in your mind, kind of balancing all that.
Well, it was precisely the witness of my grandmother that made it possible for me, because she was one of the most devout Christian women I've ever known. Certainly the most, or certainly among the most remarkable people I ever knew in general.
Yeah.
And she found a way to reconcile those identities within herself, a Christian woman of her own conviction, and a woman of proud Indigenous heritage. She did not see those needing to be a contradiction. She came from a line of ancestors who also freely chose to embrace and practice the Christian faith, including even ordained Protestant ministers in her family tree. And so for me, it seemed like it was also perfectly reconcilable based on the witness that had been given to me in my own family's life.
So what made you decide to become a priest?
Well, since I was a little boy, our family went to mass, and I would say I wanted to be a priest. On my other side of the family, my mother is Italian. That's where the funny sounding first name comes from. And so I had a very devout nonna and nonno who had a big impact on my childhood. I lived very close to them. And when I was 9 years old, my nonno said, you know, you should be a priest. You make such a nice priest. And I never could get that thought out of my mind. And so I continued along that path. And actually, it's very significant. Tomorrow would be, we're recording this today on April 1st. Tomorrow will be the 17th anniversary of the death of Pope John Paul II. And it was his visit to Canada 20 years ago for the World Youth Day in Toronto that I would say sealed the deal of my vocation. And it was his words and his encouragement that gave me the strength and the courage to pursue the priesthood in what was already then a very difficult time to pursue the priesthood.
Yeah. All right, Father. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you for your interest.
All right, super. That was Father Cristino Bouvette, who is an Indigenous Roman Catholic priest in the Calgary Diocese. I'm Mario Toneguzzi. This has been Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.